दोस्तों अब हम आगे बढ़ रहे हैं and we will talk about a world where supply chains can break overnight and volatility is the only constant. We are seeing this as of this afternoon. Today we are talking about the new trade winds. To guide us through these turbulent waters, we have a man who has mastered the balance between diplomacy and development. He has represented India's interests in the highest offices of France as our ambassador, and today he is force leading the India Trade Promotion Organization. Please warmly welcome to the stage Shri Javed Ashraf ji. A very warm welcome, sir. And can I also request Veer Sanghvi ji to please join us on the stage? And I will begin this session with an apology to both Javed Saab and Veer sir. We are ridiculously behind time, ladies and gentlemen. So our sincere apologies to you, Ashraf Saab. But we do know that this is going to be another beautiful conversation which will be steered as only Mr. Sanghvi can. Thank you so much. Let's hear it for Javed Ashraf and Veer Sanghvi, ladies and gentlemen.
Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. I think if you look at your program, you'll find that we're going to discuss trade because my guest is chairman of the India Trade Promotion Organization, right? Is that?
Yeah.
Yeah? But we're actually not going to discuss trade. We had a chat and we've decided that at a time when the world is in such ferment, we'll discuss diplomacy, we'll discuss the Middle East, we'll discuss the war that looks like it's starting, and we'll discuss where India fits into all of that. So let me start, Javed, by asking you the obvious question. Is this war going to affect us? And it looks like it's going to be a war.
Well, every war, first of all, I think, word of congratulations to the audience. This is the second day, and I see everyone still here very enthusiastically, but a wonderful presentation by Priya, and I think we deserve to really congratulate her for it. I wanted to start on a pleasant note. But the war, every war affects everyone. But look, this is a war in our neighborhood.
Yeah.
I mean, Chabahar is just 540 nautical miles from Kandla. It gets as close as that. We've got 10 million people living in the Gulf region. We've got, our third largest export destination is UAE. It's the main source of energy. It's of great geopolitical importance to us. We envision a future in which we will carve out, we will create this IMEC, India, Middle East, Europe economic corridor. So the vision is large, our stakes are very high, and the proximity is very close. And look, this war is not one of inoculation where, you do a little pinch. We've seen that happen last year when Israel and United States attacked Iran. But this time, the kind of force that has been amassed, the manner in which the negotiations took place, in which really Iran was presented with an possibility, with an option that it had to refuse. So it set the ground for this attack today. And as you can see, Iran is retaliating not just against Israel. It has also fired missiles at the US bases across the Gulf region, which will obviously have a collateral damage. So you're already seeing great volatility in the world. And certainly, this is going to make a big difference to us. Oil prices, trade flows, energy access, everything is going to get affected by this.
Does it affect where we stand? Because despite recent problems, we've generally been friends with America. We've been friends with Iran historically for the last 30 years or so. And the Prime Minister has just finished a visit to Israel. So it's really a battle between people with whom we have no enmity. What are we going to do?
Well, historically, first, we had 50 years of estrangement with the United States, 25 years of transformation, and last 1 year of turbulence in the relationship. But the fundamental premise of that partnership doesn't change. The efforts to go past some of our challenges continue. We've always managed our relationship in the Middle East, and I would rather call it Gulf and the West Asia region, pretty well. We've always had excellent relations with the Gulf countries. It's a Sunni Arab world. We've had a very strong and steady relations despite all kinds of challenges with Iran. And we've maintained and continue to build very strong relationship with Israel. The reason we've been able to do that is because we've not used one relationship against another. We've not turned any one of those relationships into an instrument of geopolitics. have maintained transparent, consistent approach in our relationship, and each one knows that this relationship is not directed against any of the other two. In many of our conversations, as I've told you, I've worked with both prime ministers and so have been there in many of the summits, and the conversations don't get into these issues about why you have a relationship with Iran, or why do you have a relationship with Saudi, why do you have a relationship with Israel. They know where we stand on each of them, and that position will not change going forward. Managing this is complex. Geopolitical space is shrinking, but I think we will continue to do as well as we can.
What do you think America expects from us? You remember during the second Gulf War, Mr. Advani, who was then Deputy Prime Minister, was asked by the Americans to send forces, commit forces to the invasion. The idea was considered by the government of India. The opposition objected. I think Sonia Gandhi wrote a letter to Mr. Vajpayee, and ultimately India didn't. Do you think we'll be asked to make that kind of choice again?
You know, I think, first, let me clarify this. What had happened is that the United States expected us to send peacekeeping forces after the war ended in Iraq, and that was to go to the Mosul sector in the north. I think wisdom prevailed at that point of time. This would be around, I'm saying, June and July of 2003. Yep. This is well before insurgency began, which really began around a few months later. So wisdom prevailed, there was great foresight, and also reflected political DNA of the country, which stands for autonomy and not getting involved in anyone else's conflict. So I think that today, I don't think that they are looking for us to go and send peacekeeping forces. First of all, we are not there yet. This is the early stages of war. Are they looking for regime change there? If they are looking for regime change in Iran, it would take a Herculean effort. And we have a history which is very recent for us to remember. That was Libya, melted into chaos when Gaddafi was removed and killed. And the entire Sahel region, that is Western Africa, is in turmoil, hit by insurgency and militancy. You've seen that in Iraq, what it went through. You've seen that in Afghanistan. So I think a regime change is an ambitious idea. It could lead to an extraordinary turmoil in the region, and one that will affect us badly. But we are not at a stage there. And I think that when that situation arises, and if there's any even hint of us having to send our troops or forces there, I think the answer will be the same again.
Okay, let me ask you about the balancing act that this government has done, which is actually quite impressive, that while in India there's a lot of criticism of its handling of the Muslim minority, it has actually managed to improve relations with the Muslim world. While in India it's always been said that if you take the side of Israel, the Arab countries will turn against you, it's a choice. They've broken that as well. The relations with the Arab world seem unaffected, yet we've got closer to Israel. First of all, how did we achieve that? And second, can we sustain it?
Well, I think we broke through some of the myths about, or presumptions about how the Gulf countries would react to the deepening of the relationship with Israel or it coming out of the closet. Remember that at different points of time, the Arab world has also tried to find modus vivendi with Israel, or at least try to build relationships. You've seen the Camp David happened, you've seen Oslo in the 90s, and the Abraham's Accord more recently in President Trump's first term. So there is an interest also in the Gulf world, in the context, and the Arab world, in the context of the changing geopolitics, and in the region particularly, of finding a way to at least re-engage with Israel and start normal relations there. Now, the street sentiments may be very different in the Arab world to what the leadership thinks about it. But I can tell you that they have, despite October 7 and the ensuing Gaza conflict, the desire for the Arab world at some stage to find a way to normalize relations with Israel. Because the Arab world, and particularly Saudi Arabia and UAE, do not see themselves confined to this region. They have much higher global ambitions of where they want to take their country. And they see normalization of Israel, strengthening of partnership with the United States is an important part. They are a very cosmopolitan culture, going back to centuries of countries that have been on the trading routes throughout, and that's another subject I can discuss later. But for us, I think we broke that myth. Second, I think we've intensified our strategic partnership on its own merit with the Arab world. But what we did, particularly different now, is that we were not hesitant, defensive, or diffident about our relationship with Israel. And so Prime Minister's visit in 2017 set the tone, and it has not had an impact on the relationship that we have with the Arab world and the Gulf countries at all.
Let me talk a little bit about this war. As far as we know, the United States has bombed military installations in Iran. Iran has retaliated in sort of low-cost, low-range sort of way. But Trump has used the term, I think, combat as the US, which suggests that this is not like the past limited strikes. So how is this likely to go?
Okay, so the easiest thing to do is to use air power and start destroying the scaffolds, literally, of the regime. You can, first of all, destroy whatever remains of their nuclear facility, destroy their ballistic missile facilities, destroy their armed forces. That's one. Suppress their air defense systems, their military lines, their production facilities. That's all easy to do. Then you can, I'm sure they're not going to send troops on the ground, but they can put militia on the ground, and they can use that to try and incite both internal protests, which is an assumption that is questionable, and use this militia or people who have been inserted, special forces, to try and locate the heart of the leadership and try to decapacitate it, and in which case try to bring the regime down. That could be one scenario that I can think of when he says combat operations in Iran, because the other thing to say would be we have launched airstrikes, which is very different.
So you're saying, given US domestic opinion, boots on the ground is unlikely, but the war escalating is not impossible?
Yeah, the war escalating is not impossible. Look, why would they be launching these strikes now? Okay, two objectives could be there. One, a limited one. Limited one could be that let me completely decimate whatever remains of their military and strategic capabilities. That's one objective. In which case it would be limited, right? It could last for 5 days, 7 days, etc. The other objective, which could be a more probable objective, would be that once and for all bring about a regime change. That's a far more problematic issue. I mean, you've seen that happen even in Afghanistan in 2001. I mean, they were able to drive Taliban away, but they were never able to get rid of them, and 3 years later they were back. And it takes a huge toll of people and resources to try and even do that. And Iran is a very large country, and it's a country which has a very proud tradition of resistance. So it's going to be something which is not easy.
Also, this assumption that there will be local uprisings. If you remember during the Second Iraq War, when they put all their faith in people like Chalabi, they had this view that the Americans would arrive and they would be garlanded by the locals who would say, please install somebody, run our country. The world doesn't work like that, does it?
It doesn't work like that. And as I said, that, in particularly invasions can have a great impact on bringing the society together, the country together. There's nothing like war to bring about cohesion back. They've also got a pretty strong state apparatus, state security apparatus, and have had opportunities to deal with that, that they are very proud. They have a great sense of history, a great sense of martyrdom, and a tradition of sacrifice. So their capacity for resistance was very evident during the Iraq-Iran war, which started in 1980, when Iran was completely in a meltdown after the 1979 Shiite revolution. But they regrouped, and they fought not just against Iraq, but all the forces backing Iraq, and they lasted for 8 years. It took an extraordinary toll of human lives and things, and it ended in a stalemate. But yes, so it is something they've got into which can have very serious consequences. And by the way, Straits of Hormuz is still a very, very important supply line for the rest of the world. I mean, it may have become less important than it was in 70s and 80s, but it still makes an enormous difference. But I think what US is looking at after its successes elsewhere is that can we completely reorder the Middle East in its own imagination? And by the way, this was the vision of the neocons in the 1999,
Wolfowitz and gang, yeah.
Yes, Paul Wolfowitz and Dick Cheney and others, is to remake the Middle East in its image with the most governments that are compliant and supportive, and therefore that is the way to manage that region. Now, this is easier said than done, but I think after last year's successes against Hezbollah, against Hamas, some success against Houthis, though not all, they feel that they have weakened, against Assad, that they have weakened and certainly diluted the strength of Iran and its what they used to call the Shiite crescent, and that it may be the last stroke that can completely remake that region's political geography.
Do you buy that? Do you think it's likely to happen?
Well, US has never been short of ambition, even if it has not been always successful on the ground.
But, I said that we are performing a difficult balancing act, and we've done it with great skill so far. But what I wonder is going to be the attitude of America's old and now new friend, Pakistan. Are they going to support America and Israel against Iran?
I do not think so at all. I mean, I'll say this, that Pakistan tries to ride on several boats at the same time. And as usually happens when you try to ride on multiple boats at the same time, you fall somewhere in the river. Last year when Iran and the United States attacked Iran, there was a very interesting different sets of reaction in Pakistan. And this, by the way, I'm quoting the Iranian ambassador to Delhi. He said that the public sentiment was extremely outraged. The civilian government wanted to articulate and echo the public sentiment. The Pakistan military wanted to sort of keep it under check. And I think that there will be a combination of public condemnation, public rage, but also a degree of private understanding for the action that is taking place. I think what the United States will expect Pakistan is to at least keep its borders closed so that there's no one fleeing from Iran into Pakistan to take shelter. There may also be a clandestine secret use of airspace for surveillance, etc. So there are different ways that the military can be useful without it coming out in the public domain. And I think that's what they might try to do. But in return for which they will expect US support for the war in Afghanistan, where Pakistan is waging now a battle against Afghanistan. Remember, there was a period where Pakistan, US and Iran Pakistan, Israel and United States cooperated with each other, and it's been beautifully brought out in a book by Trita Parsi, an American-based Iranian scholar, called Treacherous Allies. It's a nice title to have. So
here's my concern, that two things are different from the old days. The first is Pakistan could say we condemn America and our thoughts are with the people of Iran. And there was a time when America would say they have to say this for public consumption, and behind the scenes something else would happen. First question, is Trump going to be that sophisticated and take that attitude? Is he going to support somebody who criticizes him publicly?
Well,
he's a different kind of president.
Yeah, but I mean, this is, as I said, you can split the difference. You can have the civilian government, which is toothless in Pakistan, do all the chest thumping and criticism. The army says it's not my job, it's politics. It's for international relations is run by the Foreign Office and by the civilian government. We look at security, they keep quiet about it, and everyone knows Pakistan's history has been that whether directly or indirectly, it's the armed forces that rule the country. And therefore, you can play that game. But how long does that work out? As I said, it usually doesn't end well for Pakistan. Yeah. And I can, if we had time, I can tell you specific instances where it didn't end well for Pakistan when they overplayed their card, including with us in regard to the United States.
So is there a possibility, because that's something you raised, which is that the Pakistanis, in return for covert support, use of military facilities, if not that, then at least airspace, closing borders, will demand a price, and that price will go beyond Afghanistan and affect India?
Well, that's something which Pakistan always does, even when it was when it was supposed to be the frontline ally from 2001 to 2012 for the war against terror in Afghanistan. And I can tell you that, more than asking anything for themselves, General Kiani and his entire team would usually ask or what the US should not do with India, including, push India to close down its consulates in Afghanistan, etc. The US didn't go down that path. I mean, it did not try to use that to in any way dilute. And you've seen the relationship has actually continued to prosper through those decades, through those years. I mean, starting from, including from 2001 all the way up till now, and I don't see that this is an end of the story. It will continue to grow in the future as well.
Now, you attribute a certain amount of sanity to American foreign policy, which we've usually seen, but is that still the case under Trump?
I think I mean, President Trump has, now you've come to a very complex question.
Right.
And I'll say this to start with, that in many ways, President Trump, in terms of policy, it may be an extreme expression or even a culmination and not an aberration of the trends in US broader strategic approach globally. But in terms of his personality, in terms of his impetuosity, in terms of the way he approaches issues, I think he may be a little different from the others. But I think you cannot in any way say that this is a complete departure from the trends I've been seeing in the US policy from the beginning of the 2000s, but particularly sharpened from 2008 onwards. And that is basically because the United States, I mean, it's a long, complex history, but the thing is that the first wave of globalization, 1870 to 1914, concentrated power in the Western hand, made US the global power it is. The second wave of globalization, 1970 to 2008 onwards, consolidated US power, but also led to the emergence of China as a peer competitor or a potentially peer competitor. And now you see that has made the United States feel today that the global system that it sort of created after the Second World War is no longer useful to it, no longer attractive, and that it is much better for the United States to exercise its unmatched power unilaterally in pursuit of its interest. And because there is a gap between, see, its economic dominance is slipping somewhat, but its military power remains absolutely unrivaled. And this is something which this is leading to temptations for coercive exercise of power, whether it is military. And then with regard to tariffs, it's a different story, because he also believes that tariffs are punishments that he inflicts on other countries for having carried out theft. He doesn't believe deficits are macroeconomic outcomes. They are thefts, that allies are freeloaders, and that international rules are basically fetters and not frameworks of engagement. But having said all this, there are certain continuity in US policy, but also a certain exercise, much more the pretense that the United States used to have, and I'm being a bit cynical, but it is true, the pretense that the United States used to have that whatever it did was in pursuit of the larger public interest, and that it was delivering international public good. That was the genius of the American-led international order. But no, it has dropped that pretense. It just speaks for its interest now, and that may be in some sense a more honest world in which we know what the US intentions are, what its power is, how it is going to exercise it, whether it is in military terms, political terms, or trade or finance terms. In any case, now we are entering into a new battle, a new geopolitical competition, which will be centered around technology, trade, investment, etc. It will lead to a sense of fragmentation. Already 3/4 of the investments, FDI, are now aligned along geopolitical lines, not driven by market calculations, and that's also affecting trade. So the geopolitical impact of trade is already visible. All of this is a reflection of the way the US has been adjusting to the new global realities. Trump has, in a sense, as it often happens in any development, accelerated it, has been disruptive, and in some way been an extreme manifestation of it.
We have time for just one last question. We talked at the beginning of what this means for India, this coming war. What does it mean for the average man and woman in this hall? Does this mean that the stock market will be in trouble? Does this mean that oil will become more expensive? Does it mean that economic growth all over the world, including India, will be affected if this conflict goes on? What does it mean for us?
So I've never invested in stock market, I must tell you this. So I have no idea how it works. But I'll tell you this, that yes, its economic impact is obvious. It's going to be there. I mean, as it is, you are seeing the overall tensions in the world, the unpredictability, uncertainty, the technological disruptions, the AI age. All of that has had some serious impact on the world. And I think any conflict, and particularly a conflict like this, if it goes beyond the next 6 days, and if it gets into a more regional conflict, will certainly have impact on the economy, and therefore on markets, on trade, then it will obviously be priced into the stock market as well.
So we live in dangerous times, and we could be on the edge of something pretty bad, right?
Well, I think, yeah, I mean, it is a truism to say that this is a period of turbulence, which is always the case when an order ends and a new one is yet to form. So you disturb an equilibrium, however that equilibrium is established, either through the power of one and the submission of others, or by the collaboration of others. Whatever be that equilibrium, if you disturb it, before you reach the next equilibrium, you are going to have a period of turbulence, turmoil, uncertainty, volatility. All of that we are experiencing, violence, and till people are able to adjust to a new order. Now, what that will be, nobody really knows. And we don't have to reflexively think in terms of 20th century orders of bipolarity, unipolarity, multipolarity. For much of human history, the world was neither unipolar or bipolar, nor did it have a global architecture of institution, laws, mechanisms, treaties, etc. For much of human history. This might just have been an aberration in human history, and we are moving away from the 300 years of industrial age into now an AI age. That transition in itself is something of great importance and have a great consequence on the shape of the world going forward.
We're out of time, Javed, but
yes,
thank you so much for making sense of events as they unfold at what is a difficult time for the world and perhaps for India. Many thanks.
Thank you very much. Thanks for you. Thanks.
ABP Ananda, এগিয়ে থাকে, এগিয়ে রাখে।